This is a rendering of one of the islands where we have willow trees that are mounted on these planters out in the islands to break the wind coming down into the shoreline because it's very windy on Lake Tianshan. And then on the left are these biomatrix trays that float up and down with the lake water to, again, cleanse the water. And then phase 2 was going into the canals. And we worked with Sherwood engineers to figure out how can we make the canals more effective in cleansing water. And the most immediate thing that became apparent was that we had to kind of keep them circulating. So that was our proposal, and this is the phase 2 development here, where we call this the Garden of 1,000 Waters. And it really is a series of about 4 kilometers long, a series of wetlands that we pitched at 1% to, because the landscape here is very flat, so we had to kind of gently manipulate the topography to get water to flow. So we pitched the water at 1%, and then we had to dig down, and then we simply lifted it up after about 300 feet and would aerate water. And that's the system that we did here to, as a device to clean the water. But we had to convince the client that the act of cleaning water could also be beautiful, because that's really all that they were after. One other point I'd like to make about working in China is that the simple, classic, pure ideas are not necessarily appreciated. On the right here is the alley that leads you into the project, and we had 3,000 ginkgo trees, 5 rows on each side that framed pedestrian connections as well as bicycle connections. And this is our proposed rendering for it. But they got nervous about the homogeneous growth. And then this is a mock-up that we did. And I don't quite understand. Well, I think this has to do with the government officials wanting to be as big as they can with the landscape, so that that is a well representation of their efforts. But it makes no sense putting plant material this big. Sure, it looks great initially, but we were promoting. They were wanting to use, well, let's do a row of ginkgos, a row of ash, and a row of maples because we can get bigger trees that way. And we kept saying, no, just put in smaller trees. The other problem that we had here was that the local landscape architect took over, and they were fearful of the simplicity of the design. So they decided, let's start putting in sporadic citrus trees as replacements for the ginkgos. And I said, Mr. Hu, don't do it. Don't do it. And he said, no, you must agree. You must agree. And this was about at the time where I was going to get fired again. And I would agree. And then he installed it, put in the citrus trees, and he later called back and said, yeah, we did it, and it didn't look good, so we put the ginkgos back in. That was the end of my China work. However, I'm not fearful of it. I'm curious about it, just like Renee had talked about. I find that the international work is really fascinating, and it's a great avenue for learning about other cultures. Here is Algeria. Who would ever think of working in Algeria? We knew one person, and this is how we got our work in Algeria. We did a series of master planning projects at the behest of the Emirates of Dubai, who were looking to expand their commercial developments. And what we found most challenging about these projects was that we never had any direct contact with the client, because we were working through Parsons, a larger engineering company here based in the United States. So not only were things lost in translation, they were never translated. This site is approximately boxed in red there, is a 15-kilometer long strip of barren landscape along the Mediterranean. It also bordered the El Kala National Park, a very rich ecosystem for migratory birds coming up from the Sahara, going across the Mediterranean and coming back to the south. And the only background that we got from the client was that they wanted to develop the project as an eco-resort, and that it needed some hotel sites and, of course, the golf course. Everything else was left up to us. So it's hard to imagine ever doing that in the United States. So with a rather loose architectural program, we started our partie by setting up key landscape typologies, areas that we didn't want development to happen. The waterfront and the bluffs, with the bluff corridor expanding as we got closer to the national park, became our one key landscape typology. And then forestation and buffer to protect the winds from the Sahara coming from the south, framed spaces and created some buffer for the project. And lastly, the meadows of the spaces between the forestation. These were our three basic landscape typologies that we established to set up our almost student-like project. This is our master plan. And one of the things that was kind of liberating about working on a project where you are this free to do whatever you want is you get to do whatever you want. And we really set up the system to be grounded in ecology and being pedestrian friendly, that we densified our developments into tight areas so that anybody living here could walk to the water without ever crossing a particular road. This is the town center, and you can see the meadows that are framed in between the villages. And we even generated or proposed an energy center with a farm and village where they would have their own crops and livestock. This is another project that's in Algeria. It's a 1,000-acre park where, again, we had no programmatic requests from the client. The only thing that we did know is the park was meant for the Algerian middle class. In addition to the middle class being sort of an elusive concept in Algeria, we found that there was little precedent for a park of this type in Algeria. We met with the Minister of the Environment, who was of little help, and even getting access to places where we could observe people gathering and recreating was difficult. I was denied access to the botanical gardens for fear that I would photograph it and I would then represent Algeria as not having a pretty botanical garden. I couldn't get into the Kasbah. They barely let me into the hotel. It's just not a very safe place, as evidenced within the past few months. There was an oil company there where people were taken over by Al-Qaeda. So it's really a very challenging place to work. And a hard place to get to understand what the people wanted to do there. And after getting back, I met with somebody from Algeria who says, really, all people want to do in a park is kiss. So that was easy to solve. I'd like to close on a project in New Zealand where absolutely nothing was lost in translation. It's a dream project that we've been working on for the past 10 years, and the key to this project was that we had a client who loved the land, and our aesthetic sensibilities were very compatible. It was rich with history. It had Maori burial sites. This is a 200-year-old Norfolk Island pine that was planted to commemorate the first European woman born in New Zealand. Beautiful, rich waterfront properties, massive wetlands, extraordinary landscape where we felt like anything that would alter this landscape and development would really ruin the soul of this landscape. So we handled this very, very sensibly, built wetlands, restored conditions to keep the silt from going into the sea, did an entry marker into the project made out of native stone, and developed some waterfront facilities, the jetty. Fabulous project to work on. So delighted to have a client like that. It's kind of the antithesis of the Dion Shan project that we work on. So we'll see how our next foray goes into China. We were just invited to do a competition, paid competition of 8,000 acres in Shanghai for a national park. I enter into these with a lot of hesitation. But I can't resist trying to do it. So before I answer any questions, I'll leave this up. We'll come back and take some questions after Don presents. And I wish you all well, and I wish you the best with any international work that you're doing. Thank you.